Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together once again, and please welcome to the stage Mr. John Finnie.
Well, Fescar ma hula dunya, ha migleitola cha hamisha own bala govan. Chef Fescar ma haun. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try. Good to be here in Govan. It's been a good day so far. I'm sorry I'm not cat for you. It's just far more attractive than me. I'm going to talk about foreign policy, and I know Jonathan spoke tremendously well about it, and also the defence dimension. And of course, the two policies are inextricably linked. And the vision that we all have is the one that Jonathan alluded to, and that is not to defend the inequality which makes the UK the poor state that it is. Now, for those of you that were anticipating anything about numbers of tanks, number of vessels and that, you won't get that from me. I don't have that technical knowledge. It seems to me fairly simple. We're a maritime nation. There will be certain requirements that come from that. But I do have a defence plan. And the defence plan is talks rather than tanks. And I think that's the future. Now, we're going to inherit a number of relationships when we do become independent. Some of them are going to be very positive, some of them are not going to be skewed, and some of them are going to be connected with our colonial past and indeed that special relationship that sort of peppers everything that we do. And it's going to be interesting to see how a Scottish government, the first Scottish government, is going to respond to that, because of course there will be a measure of continuity. And my fear is that if we don't get it right, and we point people in the right direction fairly early on, is that we have more of the same. It's already a concern some people have that the white paper isn't bold enough. I think it was a case of not scaring the horses, but I think we need a radical new approach. And I certainly don't want to see the Scottish government of whatever persuasion inherit the UK government's defence policy, which is effectively membership of NATO. And I'm going to speak a bit at length about NATO, and I make no apology for that. NATO is an obstacle to peace, and NATO is an obstacle to non-proliferation, if I could say the word. And I think that there is some background to it. There's a quote I have here from a rather indiscreet US general who was established in 1949, and he said it was with the express purpose, he gets bits of it wrong, but he says with the express purpose of keeping the Russians out, the Germans down, and the Americans in. And that is the philosophy that underpins the role of NATO. And of course we now fully appreciate that there was a cause to believe that this threat from the Soviet Union was greatly talked up, and we'll understand whose interests are involved in that. So intelligence is going to be a very important part of how we undertake our business as an independent nation, because whether it's the dodgy dossier, the intelligence that suggested that, we have to ask who says that, why are they saying that, and whose interests are served by them saying that. A wee bit of background for you. NATO is a first-strike nuclear alliance, and of course the Scottish Government's policy is to join NATO as a non-nuclear force. You'll understand I left the party of government on this particular issue. It's a subject very dear to my heart. I felt it was a lost opportunity because NATO is a first-strike nuclear alliance, and as Jeff Hoon and others have said, membership and non-support of that first-strike capability is seen as completely incompatible. But most of all, because it's key to the NATO doctrine, was the opportunity for an independent Scotland to disarm the United Kingdom. What a prize that would have been for the world, and an example for the world. Trident's leased from the US, it's guided by US missiles, it's overhauled in the US, it's hosted in Scotland, and it's assigned to NATO. And there's an excellent report, I'll allude to one or two reports, nowhere to go. So there is nowhere for it to go, and perhaps it can be a positive tool for negotiation, but I do feel it's a lost opportunity. All the unionist parties, as you know, support Trident. I was speaking in a debate in there last night, and my Highlands and Islands List colleague Mary Scanlon from the Conservative Party said, better to have it and not use it than not have it at all. What a peculiar... That's actually why I've got a meat claver in my briefcase at the back there. But this is about this perception of world power and a romantic notion of world power that I have to say I don't see it. I am first and foremost an internationalist, and I won't, and the previous speaker eloquently said the approach that I would like to see us adopt. And Britain isn't this warm, cuddly country viewed around the world, if you'd see that most of the embassies are like Fort Knox, and that is because of this close connection with the US. 1.4 million already spent on the early design of Trident, 3 billion a year, 100 billion plus in total. That's the expenditure from a country that's one of the most unequal in the world. And I know people talk a lot about jobs. I like to quote Dave Moxham, the STUC Deputy General Secretary, when he talks about direct, indirect, and induced civilian employment, less than 1,800 in Scotland. And he says Scotland will be significantly worse off if Trident is continued, to the tune of 85 million a year, and it could place at risk 3,000 public sector jobs. So there's a challenge. There's a challenge to an independent Scotland that's part of NATO. It's a funny arrangement. Said they're going to join, didn't ask the club, seemed to visit everyone to discuss it with them. And the reason I have particular concerns about NATO is an expansionist organisation. It operates in consensus, so there's no question anyone's going to say, Scotland, you can't come in. They'll say, in you come, no problem. But listen, don't get rid of nuclear weapons yet. Mighty Germany tried this and failed. In fact, after the Chicago conference, the tactical warheads were upgraded rather than removed. Article 5 is part of the NATO terms and conditions, and that means that attack on one is an attack on all, and the US invoked that in relation to, the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which is why UK forces are in Afghanistan. Of course, UK forces are going to, having been there, created mayhem, are now about to abandon women and girls to the dark ages, a shameful legacy. The deal is in dispute, but the deal apparently was, George Bush Sr. said, the Soviet Union said in relation to the unification of Germany, that they would accept that on the condition there'd be no expansion from NATO East. Now, there's various reports, you can look them up there, about whether that undertaking was kept, but that's where I see the biggest threat coming, because people remember the situation in Georgia, where they were rolling up the EU flag, seeking membership of NATO, and creating absolute mayhem in that area there. We have the recent situation with the Ukraine, a bizarre situation where, as is always the case, the West likes to have goodies and baddies. They got really confused about Syria because there was very clear baddies, and then some of the goodies actually happened to be baddies, and some of them happened to be blokes from, so the goodies were actually getting arrested when they flew into Heathrow because they'd become baddies because they'd come from, So life's rarely that simple, but when you have 16 of the 18 ministries staffed by fascists, that seems to me to be a very bad campaign to be backing. So the issues in Ukraine may seem a million miles away from Scottish independence, but I would say they're inextricably linked. I'm going to give you a couple of quotes here, one from the NATO General Secretary in April, just several weeks ago. For 20 years, the security of the European Atlantic region has been based on the premise that we do not face an adversary to our east. That premise is now in doubt. They're talking that up. Or my favourite one, and you'll excuse the accent, we're ready if something were to happen, but we're not looking to start any problems. That was Sergeant James Day from the US 173rd Airborne Brigade during war games in Western Lithuania. Now that's a very positive contribution, isn't it? War games, and as you know, they were very quick to fly their fighter jets up there. It's a murky world, foreign affairs and defence. The deal with Iraq was that US and the UK go into Iraq and Russia gets to carpet bomb Grozny. Not much publicity about that. So it was the G8 and suddenly the G7. I think they're not quite sure about that one either, because of course the dirty money from Russia is still pouring into the City of London. And that again is the inextricable link that Jonathan alluded to very eloquently about the link between capital and the great business that is defence and foreign affairs. It's the pork barrel politics, and the City of London's right at the heart of that. So we have to ask ourselves, what is in the national interest? And is the national interest the citizens' interest? And I think we often get a bit confused there. I'm hoping that Scotland's going to be different. Terrorism knows no boundaries, and there are clearly challenges there. Now, if the US is the world's police, then Barack Obama's the chief constable, and the chief constable announced another $5 billion to train allies on the front lines of the struggle against terrorism, for instance, in Africa. Because if you can move the fight about, it's quite good. It used to be in Europe. out to the Central Asia, back to the Middle East, bit to North Africa, and it's spreading it about's the good thing. I think Antarctica's meantime out, but the Arctic's certainly in with a shout. So, to my mind, that's very good news for Halliburton. It's very bad news for wedding parties and shepherds, because of course they seem to be unduly attacked by the drones, many of which are sent off from Lincolnshire. So we need a very, very clear separation from that. And the challenge that there is that UK thinking is US thinking. UK policy has always been tempered by US policy. And of course, UK policy, whether it's defence, whether it's foreign affairs, is made by and on behalf of elites. And I don't think many of the elites are in this room, but let me give you a few of them. They're the bankers, they're the generals, they're the public school boys, and I'm very gender specific there, that's the public school boys. They're the arms dealers. And there have been people who have made honourable efforts in the past to try and alter the approach, and this is, I say this as an indication of the challenge that Scotland will face. And one of them was, of course, Robin Cook with the ethical foreign policy. Some of you remember the fighter jets to Indonesia. And I read a very interesting article about that recently, and it said, some things in politics change because of financial reasons, some things change because of mass protests. That policy changed because someone walked along a corridor in Whitehall, opened the door and said, no, we're not doing that. And it wasn't someone who's represented in this room, it is elites, and we need to address that. So who's going to make Scotland's policies? Are Scotland's interests or the corporate interests going to be served, and are they going to be based on what? So is Scotland going to have a continuing relationship with GCHQ? And I'm sure their link to here will be very good. Because GCHQ and the UK security services are clearly beyond the law. They're absolutely beyond the law. The De Silva inquiry and the murder of Pat Finucane would confirm that. And it's amazing that the media didn't provide much coverage for that. David Cameron stood in front of the cameras and says, yeah, we were complicit in the murder of a lawyer, yeah. And life moved on. So I, in Parliament, have asked various questions about the UK security services, the role that they have, whether they can act under the direction of the Lord Advocate. And I think there are very challenging questions there that need to be addressed, and it is about attitude. At the moment, I'm trying to get in behind the issue of the routine deployment of armed officers to routine police incidents, if any are up in that story. And that is about establishments, because establishments very quickly close ranks, and it is about the level of accountability. And in a parliament, a single-chamber parliament, which works in proportionality, where absolutely everything's proportional, I assure you, because as an independent, unless a debate goes over 3.5 hours, I have no entitlement to speak. Then the scrutiny that comes from committees which are proportionately better represented by the government means that, to my mind, there's a dearth of scrutiny there. And we cannot have anything but the utmost scrutiny of some of these issues. So I wonder, for instance, if we're going to have a changed attitude to Assange, to Snowden, the Syrian crisis I touched on briefly there, I think very confusing situation. The Egyptian military coup, well, that was great. That was the public rising up against nasty folk. And then they were overthrown by the military, and that was the military acting on behalf of the people. So I think we had a confusing situation. Where would Scotland be in these? Scotland has links with Libya through the McGrahy case, which will be considered in Parliament Tuesday this week. Just a couple of months ago there, when the last thing that Libya needed was more arms, the UK naval vessel hosted an arms fair off Tripoli. And, so what would Scotland's role in that be? A lot of the problems come from the Middle East, and I think that the role that the Scottish Government's played, in particular Hamza Yousaf, urging support for Palestinians' bid for enhanced UN status, I think is most welcome. And I have to say, that some of the approaches that have been adopted, if they can be built on it as a sovereign nation, that will be great. I'm going to quickly tell you that, of course, it is an obligation of every nation to assess the risks that its citizens face and put in place mechanisms to deal with these risks. And that has been done. There's a great report done by the Reed Foundation, No Need to Be Afraid, and it talks about the risks it faces. And I'll quickly rattle through these. Environmental change and access to resources. People appreciate the situation with fuel from Russia, the potential for that to be cut off. Scotland is in a very much stronger position because of renewables. Water shouldn't prove a problem for us, but climate change and climate justice and Scotland's role in that is important. Social disruption, hopefully not much. Terrorism, cyber attack, and territorial attacks. So way, way down the list. And of course, Trident isn't going to stop any of these. The argument is that Trident gives a seat at the top table. Trident didn't stop 9/11. Trident didn't stop the attack. Nuclear weapons didn't stop the attacks on the Moscow cinemas. And it didn't stop any of the attacks in London. So I think what's going to be key to this is the settlement Scotland has with the United Kingdom. As I say, mutual friends, mutual well, I shouldn't say enemies, because I'm hoping we're going to have no enemies. There is unresolved business. There's very clear unresolved business. There's the issue of rendition. There's the issue of Guantanamo. There's the issue of Lockerbie. There's unresolved business with the United Kingdom. That's the business with the US. There's unresolved business with the United Kingdom. Willie McRae is unresolved business with the United Kingdom. And more of that late September, I assure you. And when we're looking into Mr. McRae's untimely demise, maybe we'll get some answers about Hilda Morell and Dr. David Kelly, for that matter. The Arctic's been set up to be the next battleground. You have Gazprom and ExxonMobil involved there. If you listen to the language that was used by the party I was in about the role that Scotland would play in relation to the Arctic, about the opportunities that would be associated with that. The United Kingdom developed an Arctic policy fairly recently there, and I asked a parliamentary question of the Scottish Government what role it played in the consultation. And it told me it had no record of being consulted on the Arctic policy. Well, there's a surprise. But I have to tell you, I'm not interested in the oil reserves that are in the Arctic. I think the Arctic should be left in the pristine condition it should be in, and it should be a UN protectorate like the Antarctic. I think that's the future. Banking regulation is key to both these policies, and the dirty money I've talked about, the tax avoidance, the foreign companies, and we need a domestic regime that sorts out that. Generals work for arms companies, funnily enough, just like tax evaders used to work for the Inland Revenue, and Scotland has a thriving arms industry. Now, I apologise to anyone who's seen this before. I'm going to do a visual aid here. With great difficulty, having asked a series of questions, I sought to understand the Scottish Government's role in supporting the arms industry in Scotland. And I was eventually provided with a report titled An Industry Baseline Study of the Aerospace, Defence and Marine Sector in Scotland, done in 2010 by Scottish Enterprise. And I have to say, I quite liked the first page. I thought it was very good, and the second and third pages were fairly traditional. They were black writing and white paper. I have to tell you, it starts to go seriously wrong in page 3, page 5, and you'll get the message when we... So that's what your money paid for, and that's not the sort of independent country I want to see. I want to see a country where the government is accountable to the people, and it's accountable to the people for every item of expenditure. And disappointingly, and not picked up by many, can I read to you from pages 247 and 248 of the white paper? The Scottish Government plans to diversify the arms industry, really good, into renewables, even better. And then, and I quote, if in government in an independent Scotland, the Scottish Government will work with defence industries to support their continued growth and to meet Scotland's own defence needs. I have to say, I would like to see a punitive approach taken to arms manufacture and design. We need to obviously do our very best to secure jobs, but I think the future for Scotland should be disassociated with these sort of organisations. One way of doing that would be through a constitution. Mexico has a constitutional requirement that makes it illegal to wage a war of aggression. We've already heard from the First Minister, he talks about a no nuclear. I would like to see human rights enshrined in that, and social and economic rights as well. I think we need to consider the effect on our relationship with foreign nationals, immigration, and there's been some shameful talk has been alluded to earlier. It wasn't the BNP, it wasn't UKIP that used the phrase British jobs for British workers. You know who it was Gordon Brown, the Labour Prime Minister, and I think that's shocking. So we are going to have to be good global citizens, and foreign defence policies will play their part in that. Human trafficking, terrorism, fair trade, climate change, climate justice, economic migrants, and overseas aid. And in a rare moment of praise to the UK government, at least they're ring-fenced and maintained their overseas aid budget, albeit they've been creative with accounting thereafter. Do we need to forgive and forget? Peace and reconciliation were key parts of the South Africa and the north of Ireland progressing. We'll remember Nelson Mandela was a terrorist, so there are lessons we can learn from that. There's a Basque peace process, and Jean Urquhart, my colleague, and I went to see the Spanish ambassador in Edinburgh, and he was a charming man, and we talked about a lot of things. He didn't want to talk about the peace process. He says, there's no peace process. Why would there be a peace process? We wouldn't talk to terrorists. So these are some of the challenges I think that we need to look at. I'm going to finish with some suggestions, and that is to build on some of the good that has taken place in Scotland with regard to both foreign and defence policies. It was Margot that actually drew my attention to a thing called the Edinburgh Conversations. This was before the breakup of the Soviet Union. Those conversations took place with various levels, academics, military, excuse me, in Edinburgh, and contributed to what in the end was the thawing of the Cold War relations. 2003, in the village of Kirigellachie in Speyside, Armenia and Azerbaijan were still officially at war, and they were involved in peace talks there. Now, I want Scotland to be the 194th country to join the United Nations. I don't think we want a seat at the Security Council. I want our policy formulation to be exclusively in the interests of our citizens and based on sound evidence. I want democratic accountability that meets the highest moral and legal criteria with clear political accountability at each stage, including clear understanding of the basis of decisions. And I want a political and judicial oversight of surveillance. I want clear terms of engagement with other nations and other bodies, and I want respect for human rights. Because if we have respect for human rights, everything else will be supported. I want UN, labour and international laws respected. I want a rights-based approach to, excuse me, all our actions. I want positive engagement. I am an internationalist, and I know most people in this room will consider themselves internationalists. I want overseas aid and climate justice to be important. I want Scotland to play an active role in reconciliation and conflict resolution. I want more conversations. It was Sandra Webster, who some of you will know of, who's co-convener of the Scottish Socialist Party, who said, and I credit her with a great line, she says that it depresses her that the first contact that a lot of foreign nationals have had with someone from Scotland in a khaki uniform is that they've had a rifle in their hand. And I think that's too, I think that's very, very disappointing. I want, if that happens in the future, for them to have a rucksack with humanitarian aid in their bag. I think that's the sort of Scotland we want. So it has to be just, it has to be welcoming, and there's an opportunity associated with this. There's much to do. Scotland has to be good, we must be good global citizens, and that means talks, not tanks. It's a glib phrase, but you know what I'm getting at. We must be good global citizens. And if that seems fanciful, I'm going to leave you on a maybe peculiar note, because I don't suppose there's too many Shinty fans in here. Shinty fan, good man, Gleva. Okay, well, the result of the century, as far as I'm concerned, took place in my native Lochaber yesterday in the village of Ballachulish. And I'll announce the score to you. It was Ballachulish 2, England 0. Now, I'm delighted England's participating at Shinty. That's the sort of collaboration I want to see in the future. So, thank you very much. More than time.